1 second. Just let Andy Gardner in. Lovely, and it's really strange. So yeah, hello, welcome to Getting Recruitment Right, the series of webinars around different elements of the recruitment cycle. It's normally myself and Brian Cregan, who I used to work with back at Reed a few years ago. Unfortunately for me, Brian is on holiday this week. The holidays have postponed twice already this year, so he's actually finally managed to get away this week, so it's just me. But he's made sure that he's got his opinions and the things that he wants to cover over as well. My name is Helen Joy, and I am a people development consultant and with a focus on management development. I have got 18 years experience within the recruitment industry though, so it's a combination of having been a recruiter, having trained recruiters and having trained recruitment managers as well, which gives me the right to speak on some of these subjects as well. And this week's session is on getting the recruitment interview right. And what has been really interesting is that of all the sessions that we've done, this is the one that most people probably think they know the best, especially within the recruitment industry or people who recruit within an organisation. And this session is a mix of people from the recruitment industry and internal recruiters as well. And everybody thinks that they interview really well. And yet, interestingly, internally within organisations, it's probably one of the areas of the recruitment process that fewer people are given training on. And it's something that people are just expected to be able to do. And this is one of the sessions that, interestingly, has had less uptake because people think that they can do it. And it's, I'm not sitting here and saying I know absolutely everything about how to run the interview, but this is a session around, here are some of the things that if you do these things, they will make sure that your interviews are more successful, more efficient, and actually better for the candidate as well. So because I'm very conscious we don't have the interaction of myself and Brian today, I will talk probably for slightly less time than we normally would do between the two of us, and then open it up to lots of discussion, because that's where a lot of the real valuable stuff's come out of these webinars. We've had some fantastic conversations afterwards, which have been fantastic. If you've got any questions, jot them down in that crop up that you think you might forget, then drop them down in the chat box, and what we'll do is I will then make sure that I pick all those questions up at the end if people are shy, but they're not usually. Okay, so why is the interview so important? Well, the previous sessions that we've talked about within this series have been, we've really wanted to put a focus on that candidate experience, because far too often in an organisation, whether that be a recruitment agency or an internal recruiter or your own business, people focus so much on the recruitment process as an internal process and actually forget to think about the candidates and the fact that this is a journey and a process that they're going through. And what's great at the moment is the sheer volume of information that is out there. And there's some really, really interesting facts here. And I know that Virgin had a particularly bad experience where they put a massive recruitment process together to get lots and lots of people into their call centres, and the experience that people had on that was so bad that lots of people actually cancelled their Virgin broadband, TV, those kind of things, because it has that much of an impact on how people perceive your brand and you as an employer. And we have got a whole session on that, not next week, the week after, which is about managing your brand as an employer. The other part of that as well, the stats about people are dissatisfied with communication. A lot of people don't apply again to an organisation if they've had a bad experience, and they tell all their friends and their network about that. So that impacts massively on you as a potential employer in a marketplace and in an area. And as there's being such a big move towards being able to work remotely now, that isn't just your immediate network. It's not just a case of, if you're in a town and you have a big population in your town, that's where you generally recruit from. Everybody knows what, I used to recruit for Vodafone and Virgin in Trowbridge, and it was like national service there. Everybody did at least 6 months in one of those two organisations. in their early career. But lots of people didn't stay because of the experience that they had. But as we said back on episode 1 of these sessions, part of the recruitment process is helping you to be proactive, helping you to build a bench of talented candidates that want to come back and work for your organisation. And if they have a bad experience, because they might not be right for that job right then, but they might be right for another job in the future. And if they've had such a bad experience of that recruitment interview, they're not necessarily going to reapply should the right job come up, or if you approach them for a job that comes up in the future. So it's about thinking about how that experience is perceived from the external side as well. So what do you actually want from the interview? Because again, if that preparation isn't done, we've all done it. And if you're a recruiter, you know when you've had feedback from your candidates sometimes that the terrible experience that they have had with an interview. And part of your role as a consultant is to make sure that that client is aware of that and that client knows that that candidate's had a bad experience. And sometimes people shy away from those conversations because they don't want to say something that's going to upset their client, because it's all about the invoicing, but it's not. It's about being consultative. It's about making sure that that client understands that there's an issue within their process. And if you're an internal recruiter, it's about making sure that you know exactly what the purpose of that interview is. So what do you want? So you want the right information. You want to know from that interview as much as you can to decide whether to take that candidate forward or not, because you need to understand which of those candidates is the best. So it might be whether this is a first interview, a second interview, a third interview. You need to have a definite outcome of what you're getting from that interview. If it's a first interview prior to a second interview, you'll want your output is a short list of the 3 or 4 best candidates from that first pool. Another thing that you want from there is a bench of, I've talked about this before, a bench of future potential candidates. If you're interviewing someone and they are somebody that you think you might want in your business in the future, you want them to come away with the most positive experience they can have and with a burning desire to work for your organisation, so that they're sitting there waiting for that call from you to say that perfect job's come up, or that they're keeping in touch with you to find out how the business is moving and whether they're then going to be the kind of person that you want to bring on board. Having that positive view isn't just important as a potential employer, it's important as a brand for customers as well. The age of technology has brought the ease with which we can talk about and complain about people to a zenith that has never been seen before. And it is very much, people always complain about bad experiences, but how often do they talk about the positive experiences? And we certainly never talk about the okay experiences, do we? So it's very much around understanding what that impression is that they are left with within your organisation. And understanding what is good or bad about your process. So actually when a candidate leaves, if you are going through an agency, talk to that agent, talk to them and ask them, what did the feedback come back from the candidate as? Did they enjoy it? Did they not enjoy it? Was it too difficult? Was it too easy? Was it too comfortable? Did they ask questions that didn't seem to make sense in terms of the role that they were applying for? Did they feel that it was somewhere they wanted to work? But making sure that you get that feedback from everybody and making sure that you've got feedback to give to every candidate, whether they're successful or not. I bang on about this in every single one of these because it's my personal soapbox. And the session next time is about making the decision and giving feedback, because it's something that not enough people put enough focus on. In terms of, and I would like to make this a bit more interactive than we normally do, because I'm getting bored of my own voice as well. In terms of thinking about what you want from the interview, those of you that are recruiters, how often do you ask that question of, a client that you're working with, when they talk you through their interview process, how often do you stop and ask them, what do you want at each stage, if any? Shall I take that silence? Oh, there we go.
I never got a chance ever to ask any of my clients that question.
Is it a question that is there a reason? Am I being naive in thinking that you could ask that question?
No, but I think there's a hierarchy where I sat, as in they just saw me and my company as one of maybe, I don't know, 2 or 3. Exclusivity, yes, on the smaller SMEs I had a bit of power, but the larger operators, you're one of several agencies working on a particular role. Why challenge their process? They're apparently the best at doing it. Yeah, that's how I felt at times. And maybe they were, but maybe it was twofold. I never asked the question.
Yeah. And I think sometimes that's the difference for me between recruiters and recruitment consultants. And because of, and that's not a criticism of UCAV at all. That's more the distinction of the way that businesses are set up, is that it's, rather than having people in their teams that really have a consultative approach to their clients, it is about filling vacancies. And I get that's fundamentally what the role is, of course I do, but it's about how you do that and about the type of recruiter that you want to be. And I think there is a shift in clients. More clients want people to be more consultative. You'll always have the ones who just want a bum on a seat and they want the cheapest price and the quickest process. But if you are working with clients who want to be that best in show client, they want to be the best employer in a particular industry or in a particular area, actually helping them to build their employer brand by having the best interview process with a purpose, so that you can say to a candidate, right, they've got a 3 interview process, but this is what they're looking for at each stage. This is what they want to get out of each stage. Because again, candidates quite often are treated as almost like cattle in a way through a process. And it's about making sure that, interviews are 2-way processes. And that candidate is there as much to find out if they want to work for that organisation as the other way around. And I think it's about sometimes having the confidence to ask those questions that clients may not have been asked before as well. And if you're an internal recruiter and you're talking to a line manager, is making sure that line manager is really clear about what they want from each stage. Because I've worked with organisations in the past where their argument has just been, well, that's just the process. That's just what we do. And you can actually reduce the number of interviews that you do when you work out who can be in those interviews. And if what you're getting out of it, you can do in one interview with 2 people in that interview, actually, you can make it a better experience for the candidate and a better experience for you as an organisation as well. Okay. So. Yeah,
just back on that, sorry.
That's all right.
I want to think about it more. I did have a few times, not many, but there was a few times when a client would come to me and say, Kevin, we seem to have the right guy here. Thanks for that. He interviewed well first time. We wanted to speak to ops and the certain discipline. What do you think we'll need to get him? So there was that kind of conversations, and I would go back and interface with my guy and ask the same question back to him. What do you need? Yeah. So yes, I have had a few of those chats, but limited times. But again, I go, maybe that's a process I should manage maybe better, knowing what we know now, I guess.
Yeah, and I think it's just that preparation to any element of the recruitment process is the absolute key. And I think part of that preparation is understanding what the process is and what the output is from each stage of that process as well. Because once you then know that, it helps guide what's asked within those interviews. I've had people that have had to go through 3 and 4 interviews and been asked the same question by 3 different people, or various questions by different people in the set. And actually, what if you'd just had all those people in the room at the same time? We could have, and I know sometimes that logistically isn't that easy, but it's almost the kind of, well, we'll make the candidate jump through the hoops because we can't organise it internally. And it's just a big frustration. Thanks for that, Kev, thank you. One of the other stages is one of the other things to think about is how to reduce that bias when we're interviewing. So we talked a couple of weeks ago about bias and how to reduce those in the shortlisting process. And it's really important that that's maintained all the way through that interview. And by putting in the processes to reduce the bias, you're actually creating the basis for a really strong interview process itself. And again, it's about preparation. How many times have candidates come back and said they were reading my CV in the interview, one of the interviewers didn't turn up, they clearly didn't know what they were asking, they had bits and pieces everywhere. So if you have that preparation done and you've done questions that relate to the job that you're looking for, the role that you're trying to fill, if you've got competencies within your business, make sure that you're using those as the basis for the core questions, because then you are interviewing and you're questioning for those facts, you are questioning for evidence of those skills and those competencies. And that helps you when you're looking back at those different interviews, helps you actually pinpoint the right skill sets that you're looking for. And when the key thing with competency questions as well is that they've got to be a question that can be asked as easily of a student who's just graduated and somebody who's got 40 years experience in the workplace, because it's about how they've delivered it and how they answer it. It could relate to two completely different things, but it shows you how they think, it shows you their experience, it shows you how they process things and how they move forward. And if you have a scoring sheet, so there's a scoring sheet on the screen here that's as an example. If you have an objective scoring sheet that relates back to those competencies, those skills, that when you've prepared for the recruitment process, you've identified the key skills and behaviours that you need for this particular role, then you're marking on a completely objective basis, because it's so easy to be swayed. When somebody walks into a room and you do the first kind of chit chat part, it's so easily to be swayed by all of those different biases, by you like someone, they remind you of someone, they give you a warm and fuzzy feeling, you think they'll fit into your environment. And yes, those things are important, but actually the person who fits into the environment might not necessarily be the best person for the job, because you might need somebody that is going to push back a little, that's going to challenge the status quo, that is going to bring a different perspective to the business that you have already. As I said earlier, if you can have more than one interviewer in the room at the same time, that can add a massive benefit to you, because you can have somebody taking notes and you can have somebody asking the questions. Even now, after all of these years, one of the hardest things sometimes is to ask a question, listen to the answer, and then write down, especially if you're trying to be objectively scoring, and writing down the things that gave you the reason to give that particular score as well. So if you've got two people in there, one can ask the question and the other one can do the scoring, or you can alternate the questions. And when you do that, if you have more than one interviewer, one of the key things is to then not discuss the candidate until you've both finished scoring your interview sheet. Because again, it's too easy to be swayed by somebody. Andy will remember when we used to do, it applies in the same thing, is when we used to do Management Academy assessments back in the Reed days, we'd have two assessors. And Andy was one of the strictest ones for saying, right, no, we will write down what we're doing here. It was like, yeah, was that Simon? Making sure that scoring is done before the discussion takes place, because Andy was incredibly senior and he'd been with somebody maybe not quite so senior who might just agree with Andy because that's what he thinks, therefore that's what I must think. And that can happen in an interview if you've got two people at different levels of seniority. The person who is more junior may just agree with the person who's more senior, whereas if you've made sure that scoring is put in place beforehand, then you're discussing from a more objective point of view. You may be persuaded that that's human nature, but at least when you're giving feedback, you've got some real qualitative data to give back to them. Try and interview all your candidates in the same environment as well. It's quite easy at the moment, isn't it? It'll all be by Zoom. And there's been some fantastic things going around on LinkedIn recently where people are giving advice on how to set up your rooms if you're being interviewed, to have all the information, to have the job description, have your key skills, your key strengths and things all around where you're being interviewed. But if this is a non-lockdown phase, make sure that you are seeing everyone in the same environment, because again, the environment that you're in can impact on how much someone relaxes, how comfortable somebody feels, and how well they settle. And if you're seeing one person in a private meeting room, somebody else in a meeting with people walking through, somebody else in a kitchen area, you're not giving them all the same opportunity to relax and feel comfortable there, which can impact on how they respond. And the biggest thing in terms of reducing bias in interview is be aware of any biases that you have. I know there's unconscious bias, but if you can have the ones that you are aware of, be aware of that and actually make efforts to mitigate those as well. If it is a case of, making sure that somebody else is in an interview with you, but just be aware that they're there and make sure that once that awareness is there, it's halfway to dealing with that anyway. Okay, quick. That's it. I don't know you're talking this long. Ooh. Okay, so just some kind of key interview tips are making the candidate feel comfortable. Have those first easy questions to relax them, make sure they settle, and that they, lots of people get incredibly nervous in interview. And when you're interviewing, you want to get the best out of them. You want to be comfortable and relaxed. You want them to feel that they can answer honestly as well. So just make sure that you're giving them time to relax. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's a recruiter, and she was saying she'd interviewed someone, she pre-interviewed someone for a candidate, and in the first 10 minutes was thinking, oh God, she's not right. She's too, it's just not coming through. By the end of the hour, she'd settled, she'd relaxed, she was completely comfortable, much more confident. And the recruiter said to her, actually, I almost wasn't going to put you through at the beginning because you just were so uptight. But actually, you'd warmed up and you'd settled down. So it is really important that people get that chance to relax. Have that structure to follow to make sure that you feel comfortable. We always make the assumption that whoever's interviewing has been trained, knows what to do, knows how to answer the questions, how to ask the questions and how to drill down to detail. But on more than the odd occasion, I've spoken to and interviewed with people who've been more nervous than the candidates themselves. So make sure that if you've got a structure that helps them relax. And again, if you're a recruiter, these are all things that you can talk to your clients about and information that you can give them to help them make the best of their interviews as well. Tell them you're going to take notes, because that can make people feel uncomfortable if they're not told that. But then try and make sure that you maintain that eye contact as much as possible as well. I've been interviewed by someone who spent the whole time with their head down, and you have no idea as a candidate how well you're engaging with that person or how well they're responding. So make sure that eye contact is retained. Use skills and competency-based questions and funnel to the detail. Listen for that we versus I. If you hear we a lot, actually highlight that and drill down into more detail, because it can be evidence that they didn't necessarily play the part in the particular situation that they're making out that they did. Make sure they're doing most of the talking. Should be 70-30 them to you. Again, I remember as a recruiter having the feedback that the interviewer just talked the whole time and then maybe asked them 3 or 4 questions. And it's about you identifying from that candidate whether they're right. It's making sure they hit the skills marks that you want, not this is the job, this is the company, this is all those things. Yes, have a little bit of a spiel at the end of the interview about that, but it should be them talking, not you talking at them. They should have all the information that interviewers tend to give out. They should have that beforehand. They should know as much as possible about the business and about the job and about the company as they can do. They shouldn't need to be told it all the way through. Don't be afraid of silence. Sometimes as interviewers, when we're funneling into detail of things, we don't like to make people feel a bit uncomfortable. But actually, there's nothing wrong with that. If you really want to get to the absolute details, sometimes it might take them a while to really think through, but let them take the time to think and come up with the best possible answer that they can. And everybody seems to know about the STAR technique now. I remember I trained this years and years ago, and it was really novel at the time. It was, oh, this STAR technique is brilliant. Most candidates know about that. And I've heard so many stories about candidates that go in and literally will answer one top level question and walk through the whole process. Well, this was the situation, this is what the outcome was, this is what I did, and this is the result that came. And interviewers will go, oh yeah, brilliant, perfect. But it's about, if they're using that technique and you can recognise that, actually drill into the detail about that and go and say, right, tell me more about that. Tell me more about your role in there. And be curious. Genuine curiosity gets you an awful long way as well. And make sure that you listen to their answers, because again, with a lot of interviewers, you listen for what you want to hear, and then sometimes turn off when you've heard the bit that you want, but actually making sure that you genuinely focus on what they're saying, what that's telling you about them, their behaviours, their skills and experiences. And don't worry about pausing and thinking about your next question and how to phrase it based on their information, because too often we just run through a set of questions without really listening and following that through to a result. And make sure that you review the process as well. What worked well in that interview? What didn't work so well? Did a question not work as well as you thought? Did the interaction between you and another candidate, you and the other interviewer, not flow as well as it could have done? Is there something you can do about that to make them more comfortable as well? Because too often interviewers walk out of the room and don't give it any thought, because it's, well, we've done that, we've made our decision, and that's that. And just wanted to make sure that everyone is aware of the funnel of questions, and everyone does know. I'm assuming that everyone knows about the STAR technique, but making sure that if you're not, that those are there and those are on the slides as well. And that key thing, I think, for me about the interview is the preparation beforehand, understanding your format, making sure you've got the questions that relax the candidate at the beginning, that you've then got prepared competency questions that give you information about the skills that you're looking for, and that you know what you want to come away with, and that to a degree that person doesn't leave until you've got what you need from them, whether it be a positive or a negative. And giving them the chance to ask those questions as well. So nothing inordinately groundbreaking there, but actually a lot of things that a lot of people don't necessarily do all the time, every time. And that's where that consistency is actually the key. I'm very conscious that I've spoken for half an hour now, so I'm going to unshare my screen. And hopefully we can have somebody's been, don't know how long we've been waiting in the waiting room. See if we've got any questions. Okay, so, thanks for just reading. So everyone's seen the chat there. Andy, feel free to, you're still here, feel free to pipe up.
Yeah, I mean, if Mag's still here, I'm not sure. See, I know Mag well from Reed Tech and the Birmingham days. And with interviewing, I always used to try and have a partner to stop my, because I do have a few bias. And the things like, if I see lots of moves, I have an instant kind of, they've been fired loads of times. And you have some little biases and bits and pieces that and I'm aware of them. So I'll always take a partner in with me. And bizarrely, the one I was used to take, although we're quite alike in some ways, and you'll know this individual, I used to take Simon Fowler in most interviews with me with senior ones, because he used to spot, because he's quite a complicated character himself in a good way, he would spot things I would never spot. And the analogy I used to give is, have you ever seen when Benedict Cumberbatch does the kind of Sherlock Holmes bit, and he'll look at someone and it'll show little bubbles like must smoke because of whatever. Notice a slightly chewed collar, which would suggest a nervous tick. But that's how Simon thinks. And he would spot things and I would go, oh my God, you're right. Yeah. So he was always my interviewing partner in crime, and it worked well because he would spot things I wouldn't, and vice versa. But I would also use other people. So to answer Mag's question, always have a partner. I agree with that completely. The other question he had about how do you differentiate between a grad who's never done it and someone who's done it for 5 years is just, as I put on there, just ask questions like how would you add value? How would you learn about X? How would you integrate yourself into the team? So not about tell me about how you take this line of JavaScript and do whatever, or how you tell me about a project where you've had £5 million budget. Well, the whole interviewing thing is fascinating because I've been on such a journey the last year with interviews where I've been on the receiving end, I'm talking to clients. And the one thing I would say is that I was trying to get myself a job for probably a chunk of last year. Then I decided to set up on my own and try and place people. And interestingly, I had some amazing experiences with some organisations, and I had some dreadful ones with particularly some of the larger ones. And it's interesting, I made a conscious decision that as a recruiter again, I probably wouldn't work with the ones where I had an abominable experience. So going back to the ones you said, there's one company, and I won't name them because there might be someone on here from them. In fact, there's two really, but one particularly where I had my time wasted spectacularly, where you could tell the interviewers weren't talking to each other. The goalposts change on a regular basis. It was almost became a laughing joke to the point where they're still ringing me now about a role that I've already said, do you have any sort of applicant tracking system and keep any notes? It's like they've forgotten completely that I've met 2 or 3 people already and said I'm not interested. So it's amazing how that continuity of make sure you keep notes, you speak to people, the candidate care afterwards, because it does leave an indelible mark forever. So it's something. It's not just the interview itself is key, but it's then how you, even if that candidate's not right for that role, how you communicate with them afterwards. Otherwise, you're just going to, do you know what? I would never work for your organisation as a cleaner or the CEO because it's shambles. So I've seen kind of this. That's why I was interested in this one more than many, because I've been on all sides of the fence in the last year. So it's interesting.
And it's not rocket science.
No.
It's simple, straightforward things that if they are done consistently and well, make such a big difference. Because for me, the company that I worked for, so when I left Reed, I went back to frontline recruitment for a few years. And the company that I worked with, their whole policy was that you as somebody who interacted, I was more kind of client facing, but I had a set of candidates that I worked with as well. And the idea was that I had a particular client and I was building that bench of talent for that client. So anybody who wasn't right for the job that I was interviewing for at the time, I would keep warm, I would keep engaged with. And most of the time that was great because they had a good experience in their first interview. Not quite right for this one, maybe for that one there, that's going to be however this long or that long. But then sometimes they'd go completely crazy and just completely sort of knacker up the interview process. They'd be really bad in the interview, or they'd add in extra interview stages and just turn that candidate right off. And it could be somebody I'd been keeping warm for 6, 12, 18 months sometimes. And one interview can completely undo, a bad interview can completely undo all the good work beforehand, all the work that I've been doing for, in the interim as well. And as a client, sometimes they just turn around and go, oh, well, they obviously weren't right for us then.
I had one quite recently where it was more like a reverse marketing thing because they wanted to see senior people with a certain background. And this individual, someone I know personally, and they were on a 6-figure salary, and they wanted to see them. The person interviewing them was an MD. They were 10 minutes late and they were eating a yogurt on Zoom while they interviewed them. So you're thinking, oh dear God, okay.
Yeah.
And it's but in terms of, I said it wasn't a froob, was it? Please tell me it was like a spoon and a fork. I'd have gone like, let me finish that, and we'll yeah. But the one bias I found, and I have to educate my clients on this, is that there's a massive bias between immediately available candidates and ones in a job, and that's where I get. Well, I get the historical bias is over. They've clearly been fired, and they're in a job, so we want the one in a job possibly more than we want the one that's immediately available. That's wrong, by the way. That even historically, that's the wrong attitude, because I think I've put stuff on LinkedIn about this. Two of my better managerial hires way before COVID, two people who were immediately available for very different reasons. I won't bore you with why, but they had a great reason, and they're still at Reed. I'm not. They are, and they were great. I think even more so now in COVID, where even if you did have that little bit of a bias beforehand, which was wrong, now there are some fantastic people that found themselves out of a position through no fault of their own, financial mismanagement. A company has to look after itself and make sure it survives. But there is a definite bias with the way that candidates are interviewed and the aftercare and the process. It almost seems as though we must take better care of those in a role, and the ones that are immediate are a bit more, they're a bit more tender penny. Yeah. And it really is the wrong way to look at it. And I've had to educate a few clients and said, listen, in many ways, you need to look after the ones immediately better, because actually they're the ones you're going to get. The ones that are in a role, 8 out of 10 are going to get cold feet at some point through this process against the backdrop of a pandemic. You're probably not going to get them. You might do, but there's a chance you won't. So, you need to be looking at this with as a level playing field. And yes, my biggest challenge at the moment is trying to educate clients to treat both the same, and they even, whether it's conscious or unconscious, they just don't.
Yeah. And I think it will definitely change, because when things start to pick up, because they always do. It's just a question of when, isn't it? It will be those people that are immediately available will get snapped up, because the speed at which things will start to move will be such that those people will just go straight away.
Before COVID, I was interviewed by an MD, and a really nice guy. I liked him, and he kind of said to me, no one gets rid of the best people. Why are you really out of a role? I was like, okay. Luckily, I had some references from the founder, which was quite nice. Well, he liked me. But again, would you say that to a candidate in a role ever? Why are you really looking at you about to get fired?
Well, and it could be, because actually the amount of people who look for another role while they're still in a role, whose performance dips, and they're looking for another role because, especially within recruitment, because they know that they've got 3 months and then they are going to get fired. Is quite scary, isn't it? So Louisa, brilliant, good. Please drop me a line if there's anything else that I'm more than happy to have a chat offline and help out there. Padma, values, absolutely massive. It is. I think that is one of the biggest factors that help people stay with an organisation.
Sorry, I'm just jumping in quickly.
They do.
Yeah, and they do, and it's I missed the beginning, so it might have been discussed then. So sorry, I was late. But yeah, it's a deal breaker. I've seen. So my Reed days are behind me, but that's what I've seen. In the last few years, is I do a lot of that work with my clients, because it's that whole consultative approach, isn't it? And I appreciate. I think you were saying earlier, Kev, that it's harder to do that with the bigger corporates and have that level of interaction and trust. But with SMEs, you absolutely can. And I think it's guiding them on that recruitment process and asking them to involve the value alignment piece and not just competencies and skills. And I've seen the success. I've seen these SMEs grow over the last few years, and they've really incorporated it into their processes, and the difference is phenomenal. Not just from a retention point of view, but also from a employer branding point of view. It's very easy to then talk to candidates, because people who are aligned to that just become attracted to it, and it's an easier sell from both sides. So I do think incorporating that into your process is key.
Yeah, it's absolutely got to be part of, yeah, if you want to get the right person, and certainly kind of it's a massive generational shift as well, in that, you know, it probably the generation above mine and Andy's, sorry Andy, I'm lumping you into mine now, mine and Andy's
I'm
was,
not.
yeah, Pat this
I'm joking, I wish.
and it's that, you know, the generation above that is still quite stuck in its ways for a lot of people, and it's, there's kind of quite a bit of blockers, I think, at that level, that when those people start to retire, that will, or lose their jobs from COVID, that will kind of open up into a culture where that is much more focused for companies when they are going out to recruit for people, because the millennials, the generation Zs, I don't even know what the next one is, you know, yes, and they're the ones who, their perception of work is so completely different, you know, to the ones, you know, you can have 5 generations in a workplace, can't you? And
you can, but I do think you have a lot, if you're truly consulting with those clients, I think you have a lot of sway with those SMEs, regardless of generation. Like, I work with a couple of fantastic tech companies, and they just get it. They totally get it, and they're doing it right from day one, because they realise, I suppose, the impetus and how quickly you can change it when that organisation's small, and the ripple effect. But yeah, you're right. But we had and I was shocked. We had a legal firm up in the Midlands contact us, and they've basically to retrain their hiring managers to recruit for values, because that's the thing. I think we make an assumption that a lot of hiring managers can interview, and they've never been shown.
no.
They've never been shown. They do it maybe twice a year. So it's not at the top of your list of skills that you need to keep on top of. So there's lots there. So there's more and more of your traditional sectors, if you like there's a legal firm and an investment banking firm, which I was really shocked to approach me about our values course, and they're going with it because I think they realise they've got a shift to keep people, and they're looking at it as part of the bigger employer branding piece.
I'd love to be a fly on the wall to see what the values of an investment broker's were.
I can't wait to do the course. I cannot wait to do the course. I've been doing it in January. I'm excited because I've never delivered it to investment banking. Legal, I'm seeing more of. But yeah, so we'll see.
Yeah. It's interesting actually, because there's quite a bit of stuff going on in the legal world at the moment. There's a couple of companies that are shifting from keeping lawyers and solicitors on that track, but actually looking at having almost like a professional level for management, so that because they know that the two sets of skills are so completely different. Because I know lawyers who, when lawyers interview, it's like, oh God, and I know, generally they're interviewing other lawyers who kind of respond in kind, but you sit there as somebody who's not a lawyer, and it's like, okay.
I earn my money on those days. Yeah. I'll leave it at that.
I bet, God. But then what they're looking at is saying, right, all we're doing is we're perpetuating that culture. So we've got these people who are great with people, but want to be promoted, want to progress, but are happy to focus on a team and doing those things rather than just purely head down law-based work. And that's actually proving massively successful, because what's happening is they're bringing in, through their interview process, a different type of person. So they're starting to shift that culture. And it's a real interesting culture change process at the moment, because it's still in that kind of, it's a little bit of, everyone's kind of everyone's aware of it, and not everybody wants to do it, but it's a lot, they're getting the right people doing it, because it is that when it comes to interviewing, that process is completely different than it was when it was being done by a pure lawyer with a pure lawyerly aspect.
Question back to the experience on the call. I've been out of the game for years now, so when I did recruit, I took on some challenges because I like a challenge. So when somebody says to me, this service company is difficult to recruit for, that's like a red rag to the bull. Give it to me. I'm new. Let's have a bash. But going back to your scorecard and having the right people in the room, let's say, for example, you've got the head of, I don't know, let's say integrity, erosion, whatever, interviewing, and then you've got the recruiter or the internal recruiter or team hiring manager and maybe someone else. How do you then decide who gets the nod? Is it the operational guy, or is it, I don't know, the culture fit, the add value fit, the values fit? How do you come to decisions? Is it going to be skills based and knows the role, or something else? Or if you can't agree, is what I mean.
Yeah, I think for me, it's one of those things that it comes back down to that preparation and what the output of that interview is, so that when everyone goes into that room, they know what it is that they're looking for. Is it skills? Is it fit? Is it experience? Is it this? So everybody's clear, because if you're clear about the objectives, and if you're clear about exactly which elements you're interviewing for, the only massive difference in opinion is going to come from whether people liked the person or not, or that's where you put that objectivity into it, by having that scorecard, and again making sure people have got a justification for that score. And I think again you have to have an agreement at the beginning as to who's going to have the deciding opinion. Because interestingly, Andy, then picking up on what you said about you and Simon, if you and Simon massively disagreed, I don't know whether that ever happened.
On a regular basis.
Who won?
I think you've got to make sure you value the opinion. If you're going to ask someone to interview with you, you've got to value their opinion. Now, whether Simon we had a similar amount of recruitment experience, but he used to look at things through a different sort of telescope or microscope the way I did. And I valued that and he valued mine. So, but again, if you don't value the opinion of the person you're interviewing with, forget levels. It doesn't matter who's more senior, who's more junior. That's not important. There's no point doing it. Because if that person says, well, I saw this and I really liked it, you go, okay, maybe I wasn't sure about it, so I didn't respond. If you don't value their opinion, there's no point. And you're right, you've got to carve up. I always used to carve up the questions, because Reed used to have those quite useful competency-based interview sort of packs. And I'd agree beforehand, okay, right, you try and almost, because I knew how Simon used to think, I'd try and do the questions that I thought he'd ask better questions, sub-questions about. I'd do the numbers bit, he'd do the character part of it. So yeah, you've got to almost, like I say, preparation's key. And yeah, you've got to take on board, because there's absolutely no point bringing someone in for the sake of it, and then you just steam around and go, yeah, brilliant, I hear what you're saying, but I'm taking them anyway, because then you've just wasted everyone's time. So. And
I'd love to ask Padma, actually, if it came down to like between the values and the experience or the skills, which I think I know the answer, but I'm just going to ask anyway. Which would you kind of put the weight on?
Both. You realistically, you need, I think, when I was listening to your question, Kev, I just thought, no, I think I'd have to, in my mind, when I look at my clients, I think they put weight on both. They have those conversations beforehand. But the really successful ones, I believe, and they've evidenced it, they don't shift on the values. So, but you've got to have elements of skill, but there's obviously some non-essentials, but they won't shift on certain values. But it's also deeper than that, I think. It's values for that role. It's not necessarily just an organisational value, because certain values will be more prevalent in different roles. And I think that's really key for a hiring manager to think about beforehand. So those are the sort of conversations I have a lot, really. Yeah, so I genuinely think they both have their part. It's not so black and white for me, but values, I think certain things you just can't shift.
And I think it's really, what's really key there, I think, is where making sure that those values are embedded across the whole business. Because if you've got a hiring manager who's not totally on board with the values, but you've got HR and recruiting who are totally bought into it, that's where you sometimes can get a bit of friction. But it is really important to have that clarity beforehand, isn't it? To know this is what we're looking for and this is what they need to evidence, whether that be skills, experience, values, and where the balance is and what. But the thing is, fundamentally, if someone doesn't share the values of the organisation, they're not going to be happy in the long term, are they?
No, and I just think you're so right in the sense of there's that disparity. If they don't, they're just essentially words then, aren't they? And if, it's got to be as a collective, and it's got to come from the leadership team, that if people don't live and breathe those values, you've got to be confident, and the environment's got to lend itself so that you can call that behaviour out. And ultimately, it doesn't exist in a lot of companies, and that's the issue, isn't it? Because you've got one team saying one thing and living by it, and another team or person do not. So yeah,
I think,
there's progress.
you haven't watched Bob Keeler, anyone? No? Bob Keeler? Okay, former chief exec, Wood, in Aberdeen. Watch his TED talk on values, very good. KIERR, Bob Keeler. He talks about values, and as he was growing with Wood internally, he asked a lot of employees about the values, and yes, they were written down on mouse mats and cup holders and magazines, but did anyone actually know what they were, and did they follow them? And there was a lot of interest and confusion about that. But once they got that bit right, once they were challenged on it and learned to do the values and learn the core values and understand what they mean to the business, they felt more comfortable. They felt they were empowered to believe and do them. Yes. And he says now we were all KPI long term on the values and what we were doing with them. And that's what made that business more approachable for candidates, is everyone working there knew the values instead of just being on a mouse mat or a magazine or something else. So that's a good TED talk to watch on values. Very interesting.
I was on a call last week. It was a brilliant one. It was I can't remember his job title now, but he was a guy at ASOS, and he was talking about how they don't call them value because they're ASOS. They call them vibes. It's the ASOS vibes. But they were talking about how they've implemented them and how they were really honest, and how they have basically developed an environment where they could call each other out. But also they've defined as a collective the behaviours attached to those values, because there's no point having a group of words. So that's a lot of the work that's involved, I think, with clients, is that you discuss those behaviours, and everybody knows what it means. Because, and I do this a lot in the workshop, everyone has, honesty is one of mine, but mine and Helen's lens on honesty could be quite different. And the reality is people's lenses are different. So it's having those conversations and reaching common ground, because you just understand each other better.
Yeah, it is. I love the fact that you say ASOS have to call it a vibe. Can't possibly be just like a value. It's but it's that whole collective thing about it that is so important, is it? If everybody's got to buy into it. And I think this is where, again, like you said, with the tech companies and younger companies coming through, is that the founders and the people setting those businesses up are coming at it from that perspective, with we want to get this right, and we want to get it right now, because we want to grow in the right way, rather than we've all worked for companies where we're trying to unpick loads of stuff. Because with the management training, I've predominantly, up until a couple of years ago, my focus was companies like 100 people plus. I'm doing more and more stuff now with companies that are sort of 10 and 15 people, because they're putting that first layer of management in and saying, we want to get this right, and we want to get it right now, and we want those values and the way that we grow and who we bring in to come into the culture that we want to facilitate as we move forward. And I think it's really interesting time to be involved.
It is.
Brilliant. Thanks, Kev.
It's one of part of that presentation. Oh, sorry, Andy.
Oh no, sorry. Something that's interesting about companies is I did I think to try and stop me going completely mad over lockdown one when I couldn't find a role. I did 5 weeks in Amazon, so literally just order picking. But they, as a company, they get a bit of a bum steer from people. I'd be fair a little bit, because I did my 5 weeks there, and they really do drill into you, even in the interview process through an agency, that you're part of something bigger. So even though I was literally putting stuff in boxes, fundamentally, although they had like targets and stuff, and I'd been quite competitive. People had lanyards with like the 4K club. I'm like, how'd you get one of those? I know I'm not going to be here long, but I quite like one of those. So but their cultures and values, you're part of something, and you're part of, you know, like a bigger thing, you know, delivering things to people and all. And they, it's quite hard to put, but it boils down to sort of messaging in the canteens, all the kind of stuff on the walls, the introduction and the induction that you had, where you had to go through, you had to jump through quite a few hoops to get a 10, 11 quid an hour job. But they do that really quite well, even at the entry point. You know, they do make you, from a value point of view, they make you feel like, you know, take pride in what you do and you're part of something bigger. So it doesn't have to be like a professional job, if you will, even something that which was fairly menial. Companies can get it right if they're consistent with it.
The really successful companies, there's so many case studies out there. Whatever position you started at the company, seniority is irrelevant. They all start off, and everyone starts off in customer services. Netflix has got a brilliant way of doing it as well, and they all start off, so they understand the role that everybody also values that job and how there's links, and actually you doing this at whatever level you are impacts XYZ, and that you're part, and ultimately to make it so your work matters, because that's what people want to feel like, that your work matters. It's irrelevant to seniority. Everybody matters, and it infuriates me when people are paid like that because of a flipping title.
This is it.
If Mag's still on the call, he might remember this. We used to do a bit of work with Disney, and they used to call their help desk people rescue rangers.
I love that. I love that.
Help desk, you were a rescue ranger. You went first line support, or help desk, you were a rescue ranger, which I thought was amazing.
It is amazing. I didn't know that, but yeah.
Everybody's got a contribution. Everybody in a business has a contribution to make to the success of that business, no matter who they are or what their role is. And I was reading something the other day. It said, if the chief exec's off for 3 days, nobody notices. If the cleaner's off for 3 days, everybody notices.
Mm-hmm.
Because fundamentally, everybody has to do their bit to deliver whatever it is. If you want to be successful, and you are just as important, no matter, like I say, what your job title is, because without that job, something would be missing. And I think that's where a lot of businesses don't share, they're too siloed, and nobody kind of necessarily understands the impact that they're having on the rest of the business. And so sometimes where you get people get a bit lazy, or they can't really be bothered, it's because they don't understand that their lack of productivity is affecting things further down the chain, and fundamentally affects the success of the business. So
it does. Well, that call last week, it was brilliant. I'll have to send the link round. But it's this guy, I can't remember the guy. I don't know how I met him. But they had this MD of a legal firm somewhere in the Midlands, and she basically did her own business as a case study. It's an SME, and how they shifted 2 years ago to making everything, like really meaning it though, and making it truly values led and living and breathing them. And she's an accountant by trade, and you know, that's what she does, but so it's all numbers and data to her. So values is very fluffy and not real. So she's really had to flip it on its head, and she did this whole essentially case study around her own business and just showed how much more profitable they are. She was like, basically, living and breathing the values has made us profitable, which is bottom line what we all want, you know, as a business. So yeah, it was fun. I'll see if I can find it actually and send it round.
Yeah, that'd be brilliant. Lovely, thank you. I'm very conscious of time. We've just gone over the 10:30. Thank you all for your participation, rather than it just being me talking. And yeah, I'll stop recording now.